Something close to 6 million people in New South Wales under lockdown at the moment. Borders closed around the country, the Northern Territory in lockdown. All over 30 new cases of coronavirus in this country today, 18 in New South Wales. Let's catch up with the New South Wales Transport Minister, Andrew Constance, who joins us from isolation in Malua Bay on the New South Wales South Coast. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. First up, the fact that your government has imposed such a massive lockdown on Sydney, something you've resisted for so long. Is this because this outbreak is so challenging, or have you and Gladys Berejiklian caved in to the sort of pressure, the sort of hysteria we've seen from the other states, from other state leaders and indeed from the media over recent months?
Well, Chris, I think it's fair to say, the variant of the virus has now led to this. When you have people walking past each other in shopping centres, as we saw the other day, and people quite literally being in the breathing space of others and turning positive, it was going to take hold very quickly. So we are better to try and ring fence it. Obviously, with this lockdown, it does mean that people, for essential purposes, can go out and do their shopping, do their exercise, and of course also, where required, go to work. But it is going to be a very tough period, and also making sure that we get through this as quickly as possible and get back to zero community transmission.
The question, though, is how much we've advanced since more than a year ago, because we now have effective vaccines. We know that most of the people who are very vulnerable, especially those in aged care, have been vaccinated, at least with one jab. We have better treatments. We have a massive amount of capacity. Yes, all the evidence is that this variant is a bit more transmissible than earlier variants, but there's also evidence that it's less deadly, it creates less illness. So there's no consideration that at some stage we actually have to learn to live with some element of infections, because it seems like New South Wales has joined the rest of the country in pursuing an elimination strategy.
Well, look, we're going to be able to get to that point once we've got enough people vaccinated. The Premier said today, and she's reiterated on a number of occasions, like once we see 80% of the adult population vaccinated, then ultimately that would stop this type of shutdown, but we're nowhere near that point at this stage, and that's, I guess, the challenge. I like everyone fed up with the blame game over the vaccinations, but the reality is, until we do have that supply in the arms of everybody as much as we can, it's critically important. One of the key messages going out at the moment to anybody who's had an AstraZeneca, jab first up, go and make sure you get the second one. So it's absolutely key, and that therein lies that point where we don't have to go into this style of public health response, because I think there is one thing about the variant and what we've seen over the last 12 months. It is hard to gauge as to its behaviour and ultimately how many people could end up in an ICU bed, let alone how many people we could lose the lives on if we don't take these measures. And I think that's in the back of everybody's mind.
The point is about a national approach. Now, there's a national cabinet meeting tonight. Don't you think we need a national plan signed on to by all the state premiers and, of course, the Prime Minister for a way out of this, talking about the levels of vaccination and the like? Because 80% is a very high number when you consider that many European countries are actually starting to open up now with vaccination rates of 50% or so, and with much higher infection rates.
Yeah, look, we at the moment in New South Wales are about 2 million jabs. We need to be about 10 million. So there is no doubt that the pathway out of this, to give the community confidence, to know when the supplies are going to arrive, and I think Greg Hunt needs to give full disclosure on this. If he doesn't know, we'll say so, and then I think people are going to be more accepting of that, and at least give us a pathway in terms of the vaccines that will be in the hands of our GP network, obviously the set up hubs to administer it, and then of course making sure we can manage this economically, because this is really tough. What we're seeing now with all of Greater Sydney in lockdown, it is going to hurt really badly in terms of the economics and the social impact, and of course the well-being of our people. So I agree. I think you're right to signal, a national cabinet meeting tonight, and where we don't have the answers, let the community know. but let's get a pathway out of this so that, come the, final quarter of this year, we're not facing this same predicament like we are in New South Wales at the moment, where we're desperately trying to break those chains of transmission, where we know with the variant, it spreads like wildfire.
Now, just on that, finally on that, because whether you think governments have overreacted or you back them 100%, we all agree that the way forward is to have a higher proportion of the population vaccinated. The trouble is, when you have effectively elimination strategies, people see there's no reason, there's no stick, if you like, to get the vaccine because our governments are ensuring there is no vaccine. And secondly, there's no carrot either because you don't get an exemption from lockdowns or border crossings or even travelling overseas if you're fully vaccinated. Do we need to get a carrot and a stick in there?
Look, I think at the moment, because we're just in this really difficult and conflicted period around response versus vaccination levels, therein lies that fundamental question that you ask. We don't want people confused. We must know the levels at which we must have our population vaccinated so we can avoid these types of shutdowns. And we must know when that's going to be, even if it's not by the week, at least by the month. And so therein lies, I think, the challenge through all the national leadership based on the best medical advice. New South Wales has gone really hard for the last 18 months to try and strike that balance. But at the moment, given what we're trying to achieve in a very short period of time, hopefully by a week or so, we won't see that community transmission level with obviously those cases where we don't know those chains, and then we can obviously get back to as best as possible normal life. So that's the aim. But I think ultimately the community at this stage, and the feedback I'm getting, people are desperate to get vaccinated. But like me, I'm 47 years of age. I've gone through the registration process. But I'm still yet to have my jab. So I'm very keen to make sure that everybody has as much information as possible so that we take the politics out of this. There's no point in just getting on the television each night and pointing fingers. I think we've absolutely got to bed this down as a nation so that we know how to get out of this as quickly as we can.
Yeah, well said, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. At least we've been able to fill 10 minutes of your time in isolation.
Well, it's good to actually talk to someone, Chris, so thanks for having me.
Great stuff. The New South Wales Transport Minister there, Andrew Constance.